It started with a knock at the door, sharp enough to suggest either desperation or poor manners. Since it came at 6:30 in the evening, precisely the time Fritz begins lowering the temperature of Wolfe's blood pressure with aromas drifting in from the kitchen, I leaned toward the former. A fool would never dare disturb Wolfe so close to mealtime unless the situation was serious or unless the fool was very determined. I was in my office, otherwise known as the front room where the telephone breathes and the bills collect, when the knock came again. Fritz popped his head in, his expression halfway between alarm and annoyance. Fritz is a philosopher in the kitchen but a purist about timing. To him, a knock that interrupts a soufflé is worse than a knock that heralds a gunshot. I strolled over and opened the door, preparing my best "we don't want any" smile. On the stoop stood a woman in her 50s, expensively dressed but worn thin around the eyes, like someone who had been fighting windmills and losing. She clutched a flat leather portfolio as if it might otherwise vanish. "Is Mr. Wolfe at home?" she asked. Her voice had the kind of brittle edge that can snap if not handled properly. I gave her the practiced smile. "He's at home, but that doesn't mean he's available. He's home the way the Empire State Building is home. It doesn't move, but it doesn't let you in without purpose." "Who's asking?" "My name is Mrs. Clarissa Rainsford. I was told—" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as though the street itself might contradict her. "I was told that Mr. Wolfe helps. Quietly, when things cannot be managed in the open." I didn't answer that. Some things sound better left hanging in the evening air. Instead, I waved her inside and guided her toward the office. She sat with the kind of composure that belongs to people who practice composure the way others practice piano scales. Wolfe entered exactly 3 minutes later, still wearing his orchid room expression, detached, contemplative, faintly irritated. The orchids get 3 hours every afternoon. After them, interruptions are a cardinal sin. He lowered himself into the big chair, planted his hands on the chair arms, and gave the visitor the kind of look he usually reserves for politicians and tax inspectors. "Mrs. Rainsford." His voice carried both welcome and warning. "You will pardon me, but brevity is essential. I am awaiting dinner." She nodded quickly and placed the portfolio on her lap. "Mr. Wolfe, I've come about my husband, or rather, his banquet." That raised an eyebrow. Wolfe doesn't enjoy banquets. He considers them inefficient for feeding and intolerable for conversation. But the word hooked him. He adjusted himself slightly, a minor earthquake in the chair. "My husband, Arthur Rainsford, is hosting what he calls the Banquet of Shadows, a gathering tomorrow evening. He claims it is an artistic event, a performance, a statement about the times. But I know him. Arthur is no artist. He has arranged this as a trap, Mr. Wolfe, a trap for someone at that table. And I fear the consequences." I let out a low whistle. The woman had come armed with words designed to catch Wolfe's attention. A banquet, a trap, and consequences? That was practically a catered invitation to curiosity. Wolfe's eyelids lowered until they almost closed. "Why?" he asked softly. "Should this concern me?" She leaned forward, her composure cracking just enough to let the fear slip through. "Because, Mr. Wolfe, he intends to hold the banquet here, in your house." I'll give Wolfe credit. He didn't even twitch, but I've worked for him long enough to know when something has slithered past his defenses. Someone proposing to convert his brownstone into a stage for whatever dark little drama they had in mind. That was more than a knock at the door. That was a cannonball through the stained glass. I watched Wolfe's lips pressed together, slow and tight. He didn't speak for a long moment, but I knew. Oh, I knew. We were in it. I won't say Wolfe smiled, because that would be slander, but something at the corner of his mouth considered the option and then rejected it on principle. He set his fingertips together. "Explain," he told Mrs. Rainsford. "Why here? She swallowed. Because Arthur enjoys humiliations dressed as art. He believes your reputation, your inviolable private reputation, will heighten the effect. He has always admired you, Mr. Wolfe, the way a child admires a locked door. He wants to open it and show people what was inside was only a room. That, Wolfe said, is twaddle. He turned his head a fraction. Archie. I'm listening, I said. Facts, he said to Mrs. Rainsford. Dates, names, mechanics. When did your husband decide this, and how does he mean to accomplish it? The brownstone is not a venue. It is my home. She opened the portfolio. Inside were 12 black envelopes, thick vellum, each sealed with a dull grey wafer stamped with an emblem. A fork and a key crossed. She slid one out and handed it to me. The paper had a perfume that hid its intent behind civility. The invitation read, The Banquet of Shadows. Tomorrow, 8 o'clock, 918 West 35th Street. A table for debts unpaid. Your seat is reserved. No names, just the address, our address, and a line at the bottom. Discretion is the flavor of the age. Those were couriered this afternoon, she said. I intercepted some, but not all. Arthur has a list. 10 guests, perhaps 11. He will not tell me who. He calls them the Circle. He says each owed him something once. He says he will feed them the truth. Wolfe's eyelids drooped. Idiocy in italics. Why our address? Because he's arranged deliveries, she said, bracing herself. Rentals, a table, silver. He paid in cash under a company name. Rainsford Atelier, so vendors would accept the order without question. A chef will arrive at 6 with his assistants. There is to be no staff but them. He said, she faltered. He said your chef could watch and learn. That got Fritz to make a sound in the doorway that was not in any cookbook. I glanced back. His eyes had gone the color of a stove's pilot light. Fritz, Wolfe said without turning, the kitchen is sovereign. No one enters it without your consent. That is a fact as solid as granite. Be calm. Fritz inhaled, nodded once, and vanished. If you've never seen a proud man withdraw to sharpen his dignity, you've missed a quiet performance. I handed another envelope to Wolfe. He didn't touch it. He was measuring the room in his mind. Madam, he said, your husband proposes trespass. Why warn me? To stop him. To protect him. To stop him, she said quickly, and to protect others. Arthur is reckless when he feels cornered. He's recently lost an investment, a gallery venture. He blames everyone. He's been collecting grievances like stamps. He says the banquet is a reckoning. I'm afraid of what he will do to those people in your dining room. What can he do? Wolfe asked. That the law would forbid, if we are speaking of words spoken over food. She looked at me and then back at him. He will provoke them. He has led some of them to believe they will receive something. Money, an apology, a commission. He intends to expose each one's secret. He says a public confession makes a better dessert. Bah! Wolfe flicked 2 fingers. Exhibitionism. He let the air sit for a few seconds. How did he secure the address? She colored. He has a friend at a society magazine. Gossip about you. It was a parlor game at a dinner last month. Someone boasted they knew your exact address. There was laughter. Arthur memorized it. He printed the invitations 2 days ago. I discovered them this morning. Payment? I asked. She produced a check, already signed, the numbers neat and deliberate. Whatever you require, Mr. Wolfe. Only keep it out of the papers. Stop him before guests arrive. Or, if that's impossible, keep them safe and keep him from ruining them, and you. Wolfe didn't touch the check either. He lifted his head and aimed a look at me. Archie, the deliveries? I can call the rental company and tell them the order has been cancelled, I said. If they squawk, I can go down and squawk louder. He nodded. Do so. Also, call Lon Cohen. Inform him that any mention of an event here tomorrow is false and actionable. Then, call Saul Panzer and tell him to be available, though not yet engaged." That last part told me we were engaged. Wolfe does not place Saul on the mantel unless he intends to strike a match. The doorbell rang. Again, the rudeness had rhythm now. I stepped out and opened it to a pair of men, flanking a crate the size of a baby grand piano, stenciled with a rental company's name and our address in black. The top read, "Fragile. Table. Ebony lacquer." They were the kind of efficient fellows who assume addresses are permissions. "Wrong house," I said. They checked their clipboard. "This is 918. "True, and I am 918's keeper. The order is cancelled. We need a signature to release the refusal." "You'll get one." I signed a name they could live with and added a phone number that belonged to no one I liked. They grunted, rotated the crate, and left without argument. When a man is paid by the hour, a refusal is as good as acceptance. Back in the office, Mrs. Rainsford watched me as if each step I took was a coin on a scale. "One down," I told her. "We'll call the chef next." "Do," Wolfe said. "And tell him, courteously but firmly, that his engagement is void. If he protests, invite him to sue Mr. Arthur Rainsford at his earliest convenience. Archie, the florist." I was already in the phone book. The florist was sympathetic. The publicist was offended. The chair rental company was philosophical. The chef, when I reached him, was thrilled to be spared the indignity of cooking in a stranger's kitchen for a man who called his food conceptual. He had been paid a deposit and would keep it with a clean conscience. By the time I hung up, Wolfe had finally examined one of the envelopes with the same care he gives a new hybrid in the plant room, without touching it. "The emblem," he said to me. "A fork and a key. Mockery of hospitality. Trespass declared as design. You could just call it a bad joke," I suggested. "I could," he said evenly, "but I won't." Mrs. Rainsford's shoulders lowered, not in relief, but in recalibration. "Will you take it, Mr. Wolfe?" "I already have," he said. "You have entrusted me with preventing an indignity and perhaps an injury. I abhor both when they occur in my house." He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Archie, we will require names. This circle. You will obtain them." "How?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded once, decisive. "Arthur keeps lists. 2 places. In his studio desk under a false bottom and, if he's being particularly theatrical, inside a cookbook. He likes symmetries." "Good," Wolfe said, and it was not praise. "You will take Archie there. Now bring me the names and any correspondence. If you encounter resistance, Mr. Goodwin will manage it." She looked at me. I gave her a smile that says we charge extra for managing, but we do it well. Wolfe leaned back, settling the chair around him like armor. The brownstone had been named, scheduled, and nearly furnished by strangers, which is like inviting wolves to picnic on a lion's porch. Wolfe had no intention of roaring. He would simply remove the porch. I got my coat. Fritz appeared long enough to murmur that dinner would hold. That's how you know we were committed. Fritz was willing to give a sauce an extra minute if it meant preserving the kitchen's sovereignty. We stepped out into the evening, Mrs. Rainsford quick and quiet beside me. Behind us, Wolfe's house closed, not with a slam, but with a decision. The Rainsfords' townhouse was a brick-and-lintel affair that had seen better years and worse tenants. By the time we reached it, dusk had turned the windows into mirrors, which meant you couldn't see in, but you could imagine what might be staring out. Mrs. Rainsford led me up the steps with the brisk stride of a woman who had made this trip many times with less trepidation. I noticed her hand tremble only when she fitted the key. Inside smelled of turpentine, dust, and ambition. The place had once been a respectable home. Now it had the atmosphere of a stage set abandoned mid-rehearsal. Easels leaned in corners with unfinished canvases. Chairs had been moved for effect rather than comfort, and the hallway was hung with photographs of Arthur Rainsford standing beside people who had real reputations. He had that knack. Place himself close enough to borrowed importance so the shine might rub off. She took me upstairs to the studio. The door opened on a space as carefully curated as Wolfe's plant rooms, except this one celebrated chaos instead of orchids. Half-finished sculptures, framed sketches, and stacks of thick books crowded the floor. I was careful where I stepped. She went directly to a broad desk against the far wall, knelt, and pulled at the lowest drawer. It slid open only halfway before sticking. She tugged harder, then reached inside with thin fingers and pressed at the bottom. A section of wood lifted and revealed a shallow compartment. She drew out a small ledger bound in cracked red leather. "This," she said, handing it to me, "is one of his lists." The pages inside were neat, almost unnaturally so, names written in black ink with notations in the margin. Debts, investments, failures. At least 8 names, possibly 10, depending on how you counted initials. One I recognized, Gregory Vance, art critic for a cultural rag who had once offered me his opinion on my necktie without invitation. Another, Sylvia Kent, had been in the papers 2 years ago, accused of forging Provençal landscapes. Each name carried its own shadow. I asked her about the second hiding place. She hesitated. "The kitchen. He keeps an old French cookbook there. He once said it amused him to tuck away modern poisons among antique recipes." We went down the stairs, the silence broken only by the floorboard's complaint. In the kitchen, she pulled a heavy volume from a shelf, La Table Parisienne, 1879, and flipped through. Halfway in, a slim envelope was pressed between pages on sauces. Inside were printed cards, duplicates of the invitations, but here each had a handwritten note, initials, small ciphers, and one word, confession. Slid them back in carefully. If he was planning a harmless dinner theater, this is a mighty elaborate menu. She set the book down with a decisive thump. Arthur doesn't do harmless. He wants spectacle. He wants them to squirm, and if he ruins himself in the process, well, he's been ruining himself for years. There was a sound in the hall, faint but present. I motioned her back. The front door clicked open and closed. A man's voice, humming, moved across the foyer. She stiffened. "Arthur." I eased her into the pantry and cracked the door enough to see. A tall, lean man with streaked grey hair entered the studio, dropped his coat across a chair, and began sorting papers. He looked pleased with himself, the kind of satisfaction a man gets when he thinks he has outsmarted everyone else in the room. Mrs. Rainsford whispered, "He'll see the desk." But he didn't. He went instead to the table and began writing on heavy parchment with a fountain pen, humming louder. I caught fragments. Banquet. Account rendered. Debts tallied. He had the look of a man composing not invitations, but indictments. I'd had enough peeking. It was time to retreat with what we had. I signaled her, and we slipped out through the back door, careful not to rattle the hinges. Once on the street, she exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath for years. "You saw," she whispered. "I saw enough," I said. "He's scripting the performance." We caught a cab back to the brownstone. By the time we stepped into Wolfe's office, he was reclining with his eyes closed, a posture that meant he was considering digestion as much as deduction. I laid the ledger on his desk and described the scene. Arthur writing, humming, building his so-called banquet piece by piece. Wolfe opened the ledger and skimmed. His lips compressed when he reached Gregory Vance's name. "A pestilential critic," he muttered. He turned another page. Sylvia Kent. Ah, the forger. Tedious but relevant. This is not merely exhibitionism, Archie. It is calculated humiliation. And possibly more, I added, telling him about the cookbook and the envelope marked confession. His eyes flickered. Symbolism. Food as confession. Confession as food. Juvenile but dangerous in its potential. He closed the ledger with a snap. "Archie, we must prepare." Mrs. Rainsford clasped her hands. "You'll stop him?" "Yes," Wolfe said simply. "I will not allow my house to be used for farce or for crime. But the means must be precise. Archie, tomorrow you will observe Rainsford from the morning onward. If he contacts any of these individuals, I want to know. Saul Panzer will assist. Mr. Kramer may be informed later, but not yet. First, I must understand the shape of the banquet." "And if the banquet's shape is a knife?" I asked. "Then we blunt it." Wolfe leaned back, half closing his eyes again. "But not by force. By exposure. No shadow survives scrutiny." That was Wolfe. Calm, immovable, as though the threat of strangers dining in his sanctum was an intellectual puzzle rather than an insult. For me, the next day promised legwork, watching a man who fancied himself an impresario of secrets. For Wolfe, it was just another dinner he had no intention of attending but every intention of directing. Mrs. Rainsford left soon after, reassured but not relieved. Fritz appeared with a tray. Soup, a loaf still steaming, and butter cut in exact squares. The smell filled the room, pushing out the residue of the Rainsfords' chaos. Wolfe lifted his spoon and tasted. "A man," he said, almost to himself, "may fill a room with shadows. But shadows are nothing once the light falls." Archie Goodwin, humble servant of words, kept quiet. Dinner was served, and tomorrow was coming, with or without permission. Saul Panzer and I met across the street from the Rainsfords' townhouse at 9 sharp, which is early for art, but right on time for trouble. Saul had a paper cup and the look of a man who could nap standing up if required. I briefed him in a low voice, and he nodded with the kind of economy you learn when most words are unnecessary. At 9:30, Arthur Rainsford emerged, hatless, coat flapping, pleased with himself in a way that made me want to check the back pockets of everyone he passed. He headed east on foot. Saul peeled off to trail him. I circled to the avenue and flagged a cab to be ahead of them. Wolfe had asked for pattern, not just motion, so I ranged for vantage points with decent coffee and better line of sight. Rainsford's first stop was a cafe favored by people who say practice when they mean career. He took a corner table. 5 minutes later, a man with a critic's haircut and a critic's mouth slid in opposite. Gregory Vance wore a scarf like a sentence and treated the waiter as punctuation. I watched through the front window while pretending to read a newspaper I wasn't paying for. Vance did most of the talking, thumb and forefinger describing shapes in the air as if he could edit reality with his hands. Rainsford listened with an indulgent smile, the kind you save for someone you intend to gut humanely. They parted after 20 minutes with no handshake. Vance left with his chin higher than he came. Saul sidled near me as the critic disappeared down the block. "No package," he said. "No exchange." Words were enough. I said, "Wolfe will want the gist." "Which is?" "Vance is on the list and thinks he's the guest of honor." I checked my watch. "Where next?" Where was east again, toward a building that rented studios by the hour to people who wanted their work to look like it belonged somewhere else. Rainsford buzzed, went in, and didn't come out for nearly an hour. When he did, he was accompanied by a woman with a trench coat the color of certainty. Sylvia Kent had gotten older since the Ardaya forgery scandal, but not quieter. Her voice carried to the street. "It's not a question of style, Arthur. It's a question of provenance." He answered with a light laugh that said provenance could be invented if one had enough ink. They separated at the corner, and Rainsford took a cab. We split. Saul after Kent, me after Rainsford. His cab delivered him to a private club with a brass plaque that announced discretion as a brand. He went in. I called the brownstone. Wolfe answered with a noise that meant he was reading while listening. I gave him the itinerary and the names. He remembered Vance's scarf and Kent's scandal without help. "He is selecting," Wolfe said. "He is not inviting, he's baiting. Continue." At the club, I couldn't get past the door without joining and paying the initiation fee with my conscience, so I waited on the sidewalk and watched the parade. 25 minutes later, Rainsford reappeared with a man whose suit was honest, but whose smile wasn't. I knew him. Edwin Phelps, a financier who backed art the way other men back racehorses, fast, loud, and only until the legs gave out. Their conversation was too quiet to catch, but the body language was economy class. Phelps gesturing with an open palm that meant "you owe me," and Rainsford nodding like a man who was going to pay with a currency not yet recognized by the Treasury. They shook hands in a grip that had all the warmth of a handshake in court. Phelps went west. Rainsford hailed another cab. I got in the next one and told the driver to shadow politely. We landed downtown at a space with high ceilings and low morals. Posters on the walls advertised performances where the concept was the star and the audience the victim. Inside, Rainsford spoke with a woman whose dress had more architecture than comfort. Mara Bell, gallerist with a history of discovering talent the week after someone else did. I watched her face do arithmetic. Whatever Rainsford promised her came up short of a profit, but long on spectacle. She pretended to be bored and failed. By noon, he had made 4 stops that looked like rehearsals and wrote nothing down. A man who trusts his memory for menus like this is either very sure or very foolish. We took a break. Saul called to report that Sylvia Kent met a short man with a long camera and a shorter attention span. Philip "Flip" Dorn, freelance photographer with freelance ethics. He was not in the ledger, which told me either Arthur had added cast or the bench ran deep. I relayed to Wolfe. He grunted. "A chronicler," he said. "Even in humiliation, Mr. Rainsford wants audience." "Not in our dining room, he doesn't." "Precisely. Proceed." The afternoon gave us one more specimen. Rainsford visited a brownstone that had tried to imitate ours and settled for being itself. The bell produced a face I recognized from a courtroom gallery. Doctor. Lionel Crest, a moral philosopher who wrote columns about the decadence of taste and had a knack for pronouncing sentence without evidence. He took Rainsford into a study lined with books that made excellent insulation against new ideas. They emerged half an hour later with Crest wearing the grimace of a man who has been invited to judge a contest he doesn't approve of, but cannot resist. By 3 o'clock, the pattern was clear enough for Wolfe to hum. I reported in person, because sometimes he wants shape hand-delivered. He listened while Fritz refilled his beer and gave me a look that asked if I intended to be home by dinner. I said I did, if Rainsford allowed it. Wolfe steepled his fingers. 5, perhaps 6, he murmured. Each with grievance currency. Mr. Vance with his tongue, Miss Kent with her hands, Mr. Phelps with his purse, Miss Bell with her hunger, Dr. Crest with his censoriousness, and an itinerant lens to record their distress. A fine company for a foolish play. "Do we tell Kramer?" I asked. "Not yet. We have nothing to offer him but the promise of interference, which he can generate unaided. This is still private vice. When it becomes public peril, we will oblige him." The doorbell cut in. 2 short notes. I went. A messenger in a windbreaker held a small crate addressed to me at our address. He asked for a signature. The return label was a kitchen supply house on 9th Avenue. I signed and took it back. Inside was a set of silver place cards, heavy and expensive, each engraved with a single word. Confession. There were 10 of them, nestled in velvet like medals. I looked at Wolfe. He looked at the box. In his eyes, something sharpened without moving. "A shadow," he said quietly, "has crossed the threshold." "Subtle," I said, "but a trespass." "Indeed. Archie, Call Saul. You will both return to Mr. Rainsford's. If he is at home, you will occupy his attention while Saul surveys for additional lists. If he is not, you will survey. I require the final roster and the intended seating if such nonsense exists. And if he objects to me examining his napkins, you will tactfully restrain yourself and improvise. I do not want him bludgeoned, only delayed. We dine at 7. Return before then. Bring me names. After dinner, I shall compose an invitation of my own. I tucked one of the silver place cards into my pocket, not as a souvenir, but as evidence that the line had been tested. If Rainsford wanted confession for a course, we would oblige him, with the bill first. Saul and I took a cab back to the Rainsfords' block and let it roll past while we did what passes for thinking on wheels. The townhouse had its shades at half-mast and the kind of quiet that can be either absence or concentration. Saul studied the front like it owed him money. "You knock," he said. "I'll be air." I rang. Footsteps came, unhurried. Arthur Rainsford opened the door with the smile of a man who expected a delivery and got an audience. He wore a charcoal jacket and the sort of collar you buy when you want to be photographed. His eyes flicked down the stoop and back to me. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, as if he had booked me. "Correct," I said. "I'm returning some items you had misdirected. The venue is unavailable." He cocked his head. "But of course, that was the point." "Of misdirection?" "Of pressure," he said lightly, and held the door wider. "Do come in. Since your employer is shy of crowds, we can rehearse with one." That wasn't the invitation Wolfe would have recommended, I accept, but I had instructions to delay and discover. I stepped inside. The place had been tidied since the morning, not cleaned, just arranged to look intentional. On the studio table lay heavy cardstock, a wax seal, and a brass stamp with the fork and key crest. The air held that little bite of hot metal you get when vanity starts embossing. "You've been busy," I said, wandering enough to give Saul time. If Rainsford noticed the back door latch ease and settle again, he didn't show it. "Composition requires pace," he said. "If you slow, doubt enters." "Doubt's polite," I told him. "It knocks. What you sent to our house climbed the fence." "An hors d'oeuvre," he murmured, to remind Mr. Wolfe that even fortresses have gates. "Gates have locks," I said. "Keys fit or they don't." He smiled wider. "You'd be surprised how often a key is a performance, not a tool." He wanted to talk. Good. I gave him the line. "Let's say you pull it off. You gather your circle. You serve your courses. What then?" "Resolution," he said with the satisfaction of a playwright saying curtain. "Each guest receives what was withheld, not money, that's small. Recognition, contempt, exposure. You'd be astonished how restorative the right humiliation can be." "Therapeutic malice," I said. "New field?" "Ancient," he said. "The Romans understood banquets. The seating is the thing. Who faces whom? Who cannot avoid whose eyes?" He tapped the brass stamp. "Symbols assist. The fork for appetite, the key for access. Appetite without access is starvation. Access without appetite is theft." "You've practiced that," I said. "Practice is how art stops being accident." His eyes sharpened. "Tell Mr. Wolfe, if you like, that a chair waits for him even if he doesn't sit in it." There it was, the little gleam I'd been hoping to spot. "A place card for the absent host," I said. "Efficient. You can hate a man economically if he isn't there." He didn't blink. He reached for a card and slid it into view. Confession in silver script. Beneath, written in pencil as a reminder or a taunt. Host in absentia. "You understand," he said pleasantly, "that when one cannot capture a lion, one may still draw a circle around his footprint and invite guests to admire the outline." "I'll pass that." "Along," I said. He enjoys zoological metaphors over coffee. A small vibration traveled through the floor, the kind the back stairs make when they remember they were built for servants, not Saul Panzer. I said, "You're fond of circles. How many seats?" 10, he said. A good number for hypocrisy. Food? Edible enough to hold them in their chairs, he said. The dish is secondary. The conversation is the course. And the bill? Paid, he said with a little flash that could have been triumph or indigestion. You cancelled my table. I have another. Different venue, I said. Where? You'll see, he said, and that was a line he thought was clever. Or rather, Mr. Wolfe will not see. That will also be the point. From the hall, a cough that wasn't a cough sounded. It meant Saul had found something and would prefer I make my exit before discovery made a mess of it. I glanced at my watch like it had spoken. I've taken too much of your rehearsal, I said. One more question. Why send the crate to me personally? To confirm you were listening, he said. Mr. Wolfe does not get his hands dirty. You do. Dirt has texture. It's part of the experience. Thanks, I said. I'll frame that. I left him humming to his stamp and met Saul at the corner. He didn't stop walking. He just transferred a folded sheet to my hand, the way a man adjusts his glove. Top desk drawer, under the blotter, he said, too proud to use a false bottom twice. On the paper was a rough sketch of a long table with chairs numbered and initials penciled in. Even Rainsford's handwriting tried to perform. I read while we walked. V for Vance, K for Kent, P for Phelps, M for Mara, C for Crest. FD where the corner gave the best angle. Flip Dawn. Two initials I hadn't seen yet, HT and JL, opposite ends like bookends or brackets, and at the table's head, penciled in small and tidy, NW, absent. He planned a key too, Saul said. Envelope from a locksmith. 2 blanks milled. Note says 918, duplicate for service access. After hours. Not here now. Used already, I said. It landed in my gut with the accuracy of Fritz measuring flour. Or in a pocket on its way to ours. Saul nodded at a dark sedan idling down the block. Also, the car. Same one that sat outside your place an hour last week. Plate a rental. Drivers wearing a camera like jewelry. Flip? Not flip. Younger, cleaner. Might be hired watch. I slipped the seating sketch into my inside pocket and felt the silver place card against it, cool and heavy. The combination told a story. A man who liked symbols, a plan that wanted to be theatre, and a key that had no business belonging to anyone not named Wolfe or Fritz. Back at the brownstone, I took the steps 2 at a time and the hall in one stride. Fritz's eyebrows went up at my pace and down at my shoes. They hadn't offended the carpet, so he forgave them. Wolfe had his book laid aside and a napkin on his knee. If you want to know urgency, it's that I interrupted him between courses. I put the seating plan on his desk and described Rainsford's set speech, the stamped cards and the penciled insult of his initials presiding. I added the locksmith's note and the sedan outside. Wolfe took it in, not with a frown, but with a flattening that told you the barometer had dropped. He touched the sketch with one finger as if testing whether the ink was dry, then withdrew it. He said. A great deal of opinion fit in that syllable. Key, I said. Possibly used. Possibly en route. Fritz, Wolfe said without raising his voice. And Fritz was already there. When dinner is done, you will examine the rear entrance and the cellar door for recent scratches. The larder will be inventoried. If so much as a jar is an inch from its appointed place, I want to know which jar and by whom. Fritz inclined his head as if he had been invited to an intimate duel. He left. Wolfe looked at me. Mr. Rainsford is not merely an exhibitionist. He is acquisitive. He wants access to things he does not understand. That is dangerous. He also wants you to sit at his table without sitting, I said. That is infantile. Wolfe said, but not amused. He rang for beer, and when the glass arrived, he didn't touch it. Very well. We will answer a trespass with an invitation. He shifted in his chair. Archie, after dinner you will draft notes to these people. He tapped the initials. To be delivered by Saul in the morning. They are to attend here tomorrow at 5 for a private consultation. They will think I intend to spare them. They will come. And Rainsford. Later, he said. First I collect the appetites, then I remove the key. He finally lifted the glass and sipped. If a man insists on drawing a circle around my footprint, the least I can do is have him step into it. Fritz's inspection was not a ritual. It was an autopsy. After dinner, he vanished toward the back with a flashlight that had never been used to find anything as trivial as a lost spoon. I wrote the notes Wolfe dictated, one to each of the initials on the seating sketch. The phrasing was characteristic. Calm, precise, neither supplicating nor stern. A private consultation prior to a potential public embarrassment tomorrow at 5. At our address, discretion assured. He did not promise rescue. He offered clarity. People will stampede for either if the alternative is surprise. By the time I sealed the last envelope, Fritz was back, not out of breath but with the air moving faster around him. Herr Wolfe, he said, and placed a tiny glass jar on the edge of the desk, as if it might decide to jump. The star anise was moved. Only one jar, and by a careful hand. It is not where it should be, and where it was. Placed, the ring of dust is wrong by a hair. Wolfe didn't look at the jar. He looked at Fritz, which is how you ask for the rest. The rear cellar door has fresh scratches around the keyhole. Fritz continued. A good locksmith was not employed. A key was tried, perhaps twice. There is a faint scent of oil, not mine. Also, in the larder, one sheet of parchment paper was removed and then returned to the stack. It has a crease it did not have. I know my paper. Of course you do, Wolfe said. Thank you. I picked up the jar. The anise smelled like itself and something else, something flat and metallic under the spice. Graphite? I asked. Possibly, Fritz said. Possibly the smell of a pocket where a key lives with coins. So he came, I told Wolfe. He tried the cellar, balked, and toured your pantry for souvenirs. Not souvenirs, Wolfe said. References. Mr. Rainsford wants to borrow detail to dress his performance. He doesn't know how to season. He knows how to imitate seasoning. The bell rang. Saul came in with a messenger service tag and his hat at an angle that meant efficiency had been achieved and sanity preserved. I can take the notes now, he said. Delivery by 9 tomorrow, face-to-face where possible. Do, Wolfe said, and impress upon them this is not a summons to a scaffold, but to a mirror. Saul gave me a look that translated to, they'll come if they're smart. I handed him the stack. He slipped them into a pouch, tapped the brim, and left the way he came, without announcing the air pressure had changed. We set the house for the night the way you set a chessboard for a middle game. Locks checked twice, curtains arranged, office door left ajar to catch any draft of mischief. Wolfe retired to the orchid rooms for his final rounds. I took the front room couch with a book I didn't intend to read and the kind of quiet you listen to for footsteps. At 2:30, the world was convinced we were asleep. At 2:40, the world tried to come in anyway. It wasn't the cellar door this time. It was the rear hall window, a soft cauterized squeal as wood slid against wood, then the patient complaint of a sash coaxed above its pay grade. I moved without hurry because hurry's noisy. In the hall, the dim light from the street made a stripe across the floor and a silhouette across the wall, a man's head, shoulders, and the tired discipline of someone who had practiced coming and going without applause. Evening, I said, and turned on the lamp. He froze the way good professionals freeze, not with panic, but with calculation. He was young enough to be clever and old enough to charge extra for it. His jacket was the kind that pretends to be a uniform without bothering with insignia. In his right hand was what could have been a camera or could have been a prop. He didn't reach for a pocket. That counted as wisdom. "You're in the wrong. Kitchen," I told him. "We don't serve after midnight." "I'm just collecting a prop," he said easily. "Client said he left something." "Your client is Arthur Rainsford," I said. "He leaves things like intentions. We return them unopened." A shift behind me announced Wolfe. He didn't enter the hall. He didn't need to. His voice made the room smaller. "Young man," he said, "you have two choices. The first is to depart quietly and never entertain Mr. Rainsford's requests again. The second is to remain while Mr. Goodwin telephones Inspector Kramer. Choose quickly. My orchids expect me." The fellow's eyes flicked from me to the hall lamp, to the window he had used. He considered the word Kramer and didn't like the taste. "No harm meant," he said. "No harm done." "False," Wolfe said. "Harm is measurable in inches and intentions, and you have supplied both." Go he went, not backward, not with drama, just with the efficiency of a trained refusal. I watched him clear the sill, close the window, and vanish into the kind of dark that rents by the hour. I locked the window and pocketed the screw he had loosened to make his entry smoother. It was a small thing, but small things add weight where it counts. In the office, Wolfe lowered himself, adjusted the line of his robe, and regarded the star anise jar as if it had come to deliver a lecture. "Two trespasses," he said. "One exploratory, one acquisitive. Mr. Rainsford is collecting ingredients. Let us deprive him." "By morning," I said, "Saul will have fired the starter pistol. They'll either come to you or run to him." "They will come," Wolfe said. "Even cowards prefer the controlled auditorium to the open street." At 9, Saul reported by phone as methodically as a metronome. Vance accepted with the air of a martyr auditioning for a lead. Kent demanded promises and settled for a time. Phelps sent a man to ask questions and then agreed himself. Mara Bell replied with a sentence that had 3 adjectives too many, but said yes. Dr. Crest would attend to correct us. Flip Dorn demanded a fee for coming to listen and agreed when Saul offered none. Of the 2 initials we hadn't matched, HT responded via a crisp note. 5 suits me. Heloise Trent. JL left silence. Saul would press. While Saul worked, I took Fritz's flashlight and looked at the rear lock into daylight. The scratches were thin and recent. 2 tries, as Fritz said, one higher, one lower, like a man testing which tooth would catch first. On the inside sill, the faintest crescent of soot marked where a sleeve had brushed. I wiped it with my handkerchief and put the cloth in an envelope. You never know what will impress Kramer if you have to. At 11, a thick envelope arrived by courier addressed to me. No return. Inside was a single card on heavy stock. Tonight, 8 o'clock, the Banquet of Shadows. A new address, the house that refuses beneath, in pencil, NW still presides. I carried it in. Wolfe read it and didn't blink. "He is improvising," he said. "He has learned the brownstone spine is not for sale, so he will find a facsimile with cheaper bones." "The house that refuses," I said. "He means us, but not us. Of course, he will appropriate my refusal as decor." Wolfe's mouth thinned. "Very well. We will remove his audience before he serves them." "How?" "By telling them the truth before he can tell them a version." He looked at the clock. "At 5, Archie. I will begin. See that none are late. And tell Fritz I do not wish to see star anise on my table for a month." At 4:50, the brownstone held its breath like a stage before the curtain. Fritz had been persuaded to admit coffee to the office on the condition that no one called it hospitality. Saul stationed himself in the front room with a list and the face he uses when he would prefer to be invisible but is willing to be inevitable. Wolfe sat with his bulk exactly placed, The desk cleared except for the ledger from Rainsford's studio, the silver place card that said confession, and the couriered card announcing the house that refuses. If we were going to spoil a performance, we were at least going to give it a decent set. They came on time because fear is punctual. Gregory Vance first, scarf wound like a thesis, glancing at the books as if they had volunteered to be reviewed. Sylvia Kent next, trench belted tight, eyes bright with mischief she would deny under oath. Edwin Phelps arrived with a secretary who didn't make it past Saul. Mara Bell drifted in with the glide of a woman who expects lighting to follow her, followed by Dr. Lionel Crest with his disapproval pressed and folded. Flip Dawn clicked through the door with a camera on his chest and the assumption that his existence excused it. Heloise Trent came last before the hour. Minimal jewelry, maximum watchfulness, the kind of exhale you associate with people who keep their money and their secrets in different banks. Saul closed the door. Kramer would have enjoyed the lineup. Wolfe did not. He surveyed them with outstanding, the way a man considers a chessboard he did not choose but has decided to win on anyway. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Be seated. Mr. Goodwin will manage the chairs. Mr. Dawn, your camera will rest on my desk until you leave." Flip looked at me to see if the request was muscle or suggestion. I picked up the camera with 2 fingers and placed it by the silver place card. He chose not to test the exchange rate. Wolfe regarded the couriered card as if it had requested an audience. "You have all, in one way or another, been approached by Mr. Arthur Rainsford with an invitation misnamed a banquet. You believe it is an opportunity. It is not. It is a contrivance designed to harvest your fear and sell your humiliation. He intended to stage it in this house. He failed. He has found a surrogate. He calls it the house that refuses, which is imbecile. A house is not a verb." Phelps huffed. "What is this then? A counteroffer?" "It is a prophylaxis," Wolfe said. "I am preventing injury to my peace and perhaps to your livelihoods. Mr. Rainsford is not content with exposure. He is acquisitive. He has sought access, literal and figurative, to what is not his. He attempted entry here last night with a key cut for my rear door. He handled my chef's provisions as if detail were a spice. He employed a hireling to return. I dislike thieves who think themselves auteurs." That rearranged the air. Vance swallowed a retort, turned it into a question. "And in return for this lecture, we are meant to, what? Offer our thanks, or our signatures on an affidavit." "You are meant," Wolfe said, "to listen while I make plain the mechanism by which you are to be humiliated, so that you may be inoculated against it. Then you will answer 3 questions each. Your answers will be of no use to Mr. Rainsford and of considerable use to me." Kent smiled. "And if we don't?" "Then leave," Wolfe said calmly. "But do not attend Mr. Rainsford's theatre, because there will be no applause for you there, only a record." Mara Bell crossed her legs, a movement choreographed for donors. "What record?" Wolfe didn't look at Flip. He didn't need to. A camera at table height, thereby forgiven as decor. Microphones under centerpieces. Later, a private screening for the right acquaintances. Mr. Dawn's presence in Mr. Rainsford's preliminary arrangements is not a mystery. Flip raised his hands halfway. "Hey, I shoot what I'm paid to shoot." "You point what you're paid to point," I corrected. And tonight it would have been at faces that preferred to remain unedited. Dr. Crest sniffed. "If Mr. Rainsford means to expose hypocrisy, I do not see why one ought to be ashamed of being human." Heloise Trent's voice was cool enough to chip glass. "Doctor, your column last spring cost a friend of mine a commission because you declared her derivative before you'd seen the work." Crest adjusted a cuff, which is his way of moving backward without leaving the chair. Wolfe let the eddies settle and then raised one palm a quarter inch. "Mechanism," he said. "Mr. Phelps, Mr. Rainsford intends to demand you acknowledge that you financed a series of purchases through a shell that collapsed without refund." He has copies of emails you wrote to an assistant urging her to manage expectations with phrases that conceal rather than clarify. Phelps' jaw worked. He gave me those emails. I'm aware, Wolfe said. He neglected to tell you he kept copies for leverage. Phelps sank an inch. Miss Kent, Wolfe went on, he will ask you to admit that 3 canvases you authenticated were copies. He will not add that he supplied the copies and the provenance to match. She didn't flinch. She smiled a little at herself. I knew the colors were too eager. Mr. Vance, Wolfe continued, you will be offered an advance copy of a monograph as a peace offering, then presented with a page you wrote when you were an undergraduate, mocking a dead artist Mr. Rainsford now claims as his spiritual father. He will treat it as perjury. Vance's throat made a sound you could file as a syllable if you were generous. Miss Bell, he will imply that your early reviews were purchased in cocktails rather than earned in galleries. Dr. Crest, he will offer a letter you wrote to a patron condemning Mr. Rainsford for vulgarity, and he will demand you read it aloud. Mr. Dorn, he will invite you to betray confidences he believes you have stored in your memory more reliably than on your drives. Miss Trent? He paused. Heloise had not moved. He will ask you to say on record that you ended your relationship with him because he could not distinguish devotion from branding. A small silence made a bigger one. Heloise looked at Wolfe for the first time as if he had produced, from behind his desk, a mirror with a sharper edge. He will not get that sentence from me, she said softly. No, Wolfe said, he will not. Because none of you will sit for him tonight. You will permit me to stage an alternative in which the only thing recorded is Mr. Rainsford's appetite. Mara tilted her head. How does one stage appetite? By starving it, Wolfe said, and reached for the silver place card. He turned it over. I'd polished the underside until it reflected the ceiling lamp. He requires you. You do not require him. If you deny him audience, he will improvise himself into error. That is when he enters my circle. Crest harumphed. You propose we hide. I propose you refrain, Wolfe said. There is a distinction. Phelps cleared his throat. If we refuse, he will come after us in print. In gossip, Vance corrected, surprising himself by siding with competence. And gossip looks cheap without an event to hang on. Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said, your 3 questions. I stood with my notebook because props soothe the nervous. Question 1. Has Mr. Rainsford extracted any signatures or consents from you in the last week? Question 2. Has he taken any object from you to be used as a symbol? His phrase. Question 3. Were you contacted by anyone besides Mr. Rainsford about tonight's dinner? They went around like a confession said to a competent but irreligious priest. Phelps had signed a non-disparagement draft. I took the copy and saw the blanks where a clever man could later insert specifics. Kent had handed him an old palette knife he said he wanted for provenance. She looked pained to admit it. Vance had given nothing but time and had been called by a young man confirming dietary preferences. Flip named a fixer who brokered gigs with the grace of a pickpocket. Crest had signed nothing and given advice he now regretted. Heloise had given him a book he once claimed taught him taste. She hadn't asked for it back. Wolfe listened, head tilted, assembling the scaffolding. Good, he said finally. You will do nothing tonight. If approached, you will say you have prior commitments. If pestered, say you prefer to be surprised in the morning. At 10:15, he looked at the clock not to check it but to instruct it. Mr. Rainsford will discover that his guests have absented themselves. He will rage. He will reach for the only door that has not closed to him. He will come here. Mr. Goodwin will admit him. Mara smiled without warmth. And then I will feed him, Wolfe said, a course he has not anticipated. Flip eyed the camera. And if I bring this back tonight? You won't, I told him. If you do, it will record you leaving quickly. They stood, some slower than others. Saul opened the door, and relief made them polite. Eloise Trent lingered just long enough to place a slim, worn volume on Wolfe's desk. La Table Parisienne, 1879. He glanced at it and then at her. She said, "He took mine." "You may as well have this one for staging." "Thank you," Wolfe said. It served as receipt and truce. When they were gone, the house exhaled. Wolfe turned the silver place card over once more and set it atop the seating sketch. "He'll demand a stage," I said. "He will," Wolfe agreed. "We will give him a chair." He closed his eyes briefly. "Fritz will not serve star anise for a month. Mr. Rainsford this evening will be served truth without garnish." We set the house for evening as if it were a witness that might need coaching. Saul took the front window, his hat low enough to be furniture. Fritz, having banished star anise to purgatory, settled on coffee and a plate of small, unargumentative biscuits. Wolfe read Eloise Trent's copy of La Table Parisienne with the same expression he uses on case files that pretend to be literature. At 9:30, the phone tried out a few rings. People who had decided not to attend a spectacle felt compelled to announce their moral courage. Phelps asked if we could guarantee that staying home would not be used against him. I told him we guaranteed nothing but accuracy. Vance wanted to know whether one could be libeled by implication. I said one could, but only if the implication worked, which it would not. Mara Bell reported a mysterious text promising a better table. I told her the better table had termites. Sylvia Kent sent a brief note that read, "Tempted, abstaining, annoyed itself. Thank you." Dr. Crest did not call. He would prefer to be right in print tomorrow. At 10 sharp, Saul leaned in from the hall with his phone angled to show a photo. A long table, under cheap chandeliers in a rental space that had tried to look defiant and landed on provisional. The centerpieces were spray-painted branches pretending to be art. The place cards gleamed like confessions trapped in a jeweler's case. 3 men in black shirts moved chairs without purpose. No guests. "Venue," Saul said. "East 11th. Sign on the door says private event. Door is mostly for show." "Mr. Rainsford?" Wolfe asked. "On site, conducting the furniture." "Good," Wolfe said, and closed the book as if he had reached the final recipe and found it familiar. "He will call in 5 minutes." He did in 3. I let it ring once more to season it and answered. "Goodwin," Rainsford said. His voice had been polished. The polish had chipped. "You're enjoying yourself." "Not as much as you," I said cheerfully. "How are the centerpieces?" "Where are my guests?" "Some at home discovering that an evening without humiliation pairs well with tea," I said. "Some elsewhere." "None at your table." He breathed in, the way men do when they find they have miscounted the chairs. "I understand Mr. Wolfe has meddled." "You understand correctly," I said. "He's very good at it." "Then I'll come thank him personally." "We're accepting thanks till midnight," I said, and hung up. Wolfe didn't comment. He had put the seating sketch at an angle so that the silver place card reflected the room back at itself. It gave the desk a depth that wasn't there. "Archie," he said, "if he brings a friend, he is to be shown in. If he brings a key, it is to be taken. If he brings a camera, it will join Mr. Dorn's on my desk." "At 10:15, I said. "At 10:15, he agreed. It was 10:20 when the bell went, one long press and one short, which is the signature of a man who intends to be recorded entering. I opened the door. Arthur Rainsford stood on the stoop with the rental sedan idling at the curb and the young professional from last night at his shoulder, suit cleaned, conscience unchanged. Rainsford's eyes were bright the way a pain is bright just before a stone reaches it. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, and produced a key from his pocket with the flourish of a conjurer retrieving a dove. "In case you're busy." I held out my hand. "I'll store that for you." He weighed the moment and then dropped the key in my palm. That told me more than a speech. A man who surrenders his prop has decided the stage itself will carry him. The younger man carried a case shaped like a camera and the posture of a legal argument. I took the case too. He let me. It was going to be that kind of evening. We brought him to the office. Wolfe didn't rise. He looked at Rainsford the way a mountain looks at weather, willing to be rained on, not willing to move. The silver place card lay where Rainsford would see it first. He did, and smiled. "You've said," he said. "Good. It saves time." "It saves none," Wolfe said. "You have none to spare." "Sit." Rainsford sat, composed his face, and tried on charm that had fit better earlier in the day. "Mr. Wolfe, you've cancelled a dinner I intended to be generous and cathartic." "You intended it to be lucrative," Wolfe said mildly. "You sell humiliation. It has a market." "Art has a market," Rainsford replied. "Humiliation is a byproduct of truth spoken in the wrong room." Wolfe looked at La Table Parisienne. "Truth is not a course. It does not keep warm under covers. You propose to serve it raw and call the result honesty. You also propose to violate my house. Both are vulgar." Rainsford's focus flicked to the ledger from his studio, then to the seating sketch. He recognized himself in the pencil lines and took it as tribute. "You copied the menu," he said. "Then you forbade the meal. That's a critic's trick." "That," Wolfe said, "is a host's prerogative." He lifted a finger a centimeter. "Your circle is absent. They have chosen to refrain. You will not summon them. You will not meet them at your surrogate venue. You will not distribute recordings of prior indiscretions. Instead, you will remain here until I am satisfied that the ingredients you stole have been returned and the appetite you cultivate has been starved of spoils." "Stole?" Rainsford laughed. "I borrowed a texture, a spice. I held a key I'd cut with my own money. I touched what any guest might touch in a pantry not ordinarily open to guests." "You are not a guest," Wolfe said, as evenly as a level line. "You are an intruder with a curatorial vocabulary." Rainsford's jaw moved, working on retorts too ornate to swallow. The younger man shifted his weight like a stagehand waiting for a cue. I put the key on Wolfe's desk and the camera case beside it. "Props," I said. "Check them at the cloakroom." Rainsford looked from them to me and back. "You think you can stop a narrative by locking the theater?" "No," Wolfe said. "By locking the audience out. You require witnesses. You have none. You require leverage. You will have less in 5 minutes than you have now. You require a myth. Mr. Wolfe's house as the unassailable citadel you breach as artist. You have the wrong citadel. This one has a steward." "2," I said helpfully. "One for the upstairs, one for downstairs." He leaned back, stroked his lip with a thumb, and tried a new angle. "You dislike spectacle? Fine. Permit me a smaller one. A private scene, a single interview with one of my guests. Mara Bell, say. Purely conversational. You can supervise. I'll use no camera." "No," Wolfe said. "Heloise, then," Rainsford offered, and there it was. The slip a performer makes when the script is running faster than the tongue. He had left her name out of his earlier boasts. He couldn't keep it out now. Wolfe's lids lowered. "Miss Trent is not your prop. You used her book as a hiding place and her person as branding. You will leave both untouched." "I loved her," he said, as if that adjusted the invoice. "You loved the idea of being loved by someone with discernment," Wolfe said. "You have mistaken reflection for illumination." He glanced toward the silver place card and, failing to get Wolfe to stand, tried to rise himself. I remained between him and the door at an angle that made retreat look like a chore. He sat again. The younger man's face had gone flat. He had realized that this was not the kind of job that pays hazard bonuses. "You have a plan," Rainsford said curtly. "So perform it." "Gladly," Wolfe said. "Mr. Goodwin." I brought the ledger, the seating plan, and Eloise's cookbook to the front of the desk and let them sit as if they could speak. "Arthur," I said, putting on the voice I keep for neighbors with loud radios, "we're going to rewind your little banquet. The crossed fork and key, your emblem, means appetite and access. You have appetite. You purchased an access with threats. So first, you will list what you took to stage your symbols. The emails from Phelps, the palette knife from Kent, the letter from Crest, the monograph from Vance, the book from Heloise, anything you teased out of Mara's archives, and anything the lens you hired already recorded." Rainsford's mouth pinched. "I see. A tally." "A return," I said. "To each owner. Here. Now, if you have them, by noon tomorrow if you don't. While you're reciting, Saul will be confirming that your venue is being dismantled and your staff paid to go home without the satisfaction of a post-mortem. Your rental deposit will be forfeited. Consider it tuition." He looked past me toward the hall where Saul's shadow could be seen without effort. He could do the arithmetic. "Suppose I refuse?" "Then," Wolfe said, and the timbre dropped half a note, "I call Inspector Kramer to tell him a man with a duplicate key attempted entry here last night and returned tonight with a Confederate and equipment. I will hand him the key you surrendered, the camera you brought, the screw Mr. Goodwin removed from my window, and a tidy account of your large intentions. He will discover other irregularities with your finances and your licenses with the energy of a man who has been promised the pleasure of my irritation. You will find that humiliation in public court has a more enduring aftertaste than the private vintage you prefer to pour." The young man shifted again. "Arthur," he said softly. Rainsford looked at him, then at the room, then at the silver card that reflected the lamp like an obedient sun. The shape of surrender seldom looks graceful on men who think they invented staging. He exhaled. "You're very certain." "I am sedentary," Wolfe said. "Certainty is my locomotion." "Fine," Rainsford said, abrupt and dry as if he had spit out a seed. "Lists, returns, dismantling, and in exchange. You will be permitted to leave," Wolfe said, "and you will be told, once, what you have mistaken for art." Rainsford's eyes sparked, just enough to show he still wanted a line to deliver. "Go on, then. Tell me." "Presently," Wolfe said. "First, you will speak names." He touched the ledger. "Begin with H.T." He didn't blink at H.T. "Heloise Trent," he said, too quickly for invention. "A collector with taste and a short temper for phonies. We dated. She ended it. She's convinced I borrow light." He angled his chin. "She isn't wrong. That's what collectors are for." Wolfe let it pass like a draft under a door. J.L. Rainsford hesitated, then smiled, the kind a man uses when he thinks admitting one truth will varnish another. "Jory Lemaine, society columnist, knows everyone worth knowing for 3 weeks at a time. He put your address into the room like a party favor. He was to write a blind item about my banquet. After the fact, no names, but enough angles for the right people to recognize themselves. Viral without direct liability. The contemporary equivalent of leaving libels in a pew," Wolfe said. "Continue your tally." He went down the line, and the names matched the initials on the sketch with the neatness of a man who had rehearsed the order and learned nothing from it. Vance, Kent, Phelps, Bell, Crest, Flip Dawn. He added the young pro behind him, Casey, which was either a name or an invoice category, who had been told to deliver equipment and collect props if the evening needed help finding a climax. As he spoke, Saul's shadow deepened in the hall, and my phone gave a polite buzz that meant the venue had begun to molt. I read the text. Chairs being stacked, staff paid off, rental truck reversing with a beep that sounded like farewell. Wolfe nodded when I murmured the update. "Good. Mr. Rainsford, the objects." Rainsford produced, and the production was gratifying. From the inside pocket came a small vellum envelope with Phelps' printed emails, a tidy selection marked with underlines in the soft pencil we had met before. From his case, a palette knife wrapped in tissue. Kent visibly exhaled when I set it on Wolfe's desk. A manila folder for Crest held a printout of his letter to a donor. Crest's hand twitched toward it as if conscience were attached by string. From the young man's case, 2 memory cards with gaffer tape tags that read Table A and Table B. Flip Dorn had the good sense not to ask where Camera C was. "And Miss Trent's book?" Wolfe asked. "It's at my studio," Rainsford said, and for the first time his voice skimmed regret without milking it. "I kept it because it smelled like her apartment. Foolish, but true." "You will return it," Wolfe said. "You will also send Mr. Lemaine a note, instructing him that any item drafted about tonight is now false, and that mention of my address, even obliquely, will result in consequences he cannot pronounce. Legal, to begin." Rainsford's mouth flexed. "You can't gag gossip, Mr. Wolfe." "I can starve it," Wolfe said, "as you propose to starve shame." Without witnesses, gossip malnourishes quickly. He made himself lean back as if the chair would concede him a point for posture. "You have your property. You've taken my performance. What precisely have I done that crosses your moral boundary, aside from trespass with a key that failed me?" "Your boundary," Wolfe said, "not mine, has been your problem. You mistake access for intimacy. You believe that possessing an object, a key, a letter, a knife, confers the right to arrange the person who owned it in a tableau that flatters your theme. You sell humiliation as truth because it is cheaper to stage, and you are not content to expose, you intend to profit." Rainsford made a gesture that could have been denial and decided to descend into an explanation instead. "Profit," he said evenly, "is how art continues. My atelier is a business. Yes, I plan to monetize the evening. A private screening afterward for donors. A limited-run blog under Jory's masthead. A gallery show of Banquet relics. The palette knife encased, the emails printed in silver gelatin, the place cards under glass. Heloise would have bought one out of nostalgia or defiance. Phelps would have bought 2 to bury them. Vance would have harumphed in print, thereby marketing it. Crest would have written an essay condemning the vulgarity, thereby elevating it. Everyone plays the part they write for themselves. "And you," I said, "would be the man who tamed the lion by dining in his den." A little spark lit his eye. "Exactly." Wolfe grimaced, which for him is a flinch. "Piffle. You cannot tame a lion by shouting at his footprint." He turned his head a fraction. "Archie." I slid the seating sketch closer to Rainsford so the silver place card's reflection doubled his face. "Let's talk the mechanics behind the poetry. Your contracts, Arthur, the ones you brought to Phelps and Bell. You salted fine print in those, didn't you? Appearance equals consent. Attendance equals release. A camera in the centerpiece equals a license in your pocket." He kept his face flat, but the tendons in his hand wrote a footnote on the arm of the chair. "Standard language." "Predatory language," I said. "And Eloise's piece. A gift that returns to you as moral collateral. You wanted her sentence in your cut. Arthur cannot tell devotion from branding. So you could frame it against her purchases and call it hypocrisy. Then sell the frame." His eyes flickered. It wasn't shame. Men like Rainsford save shame for when it's fashionable. It was realization that his private footwork had been seen. Wolfe tapped the vellum envelope with one finger. "The emails. You culled them from an assistant's archive you insisted on auditing when your gallery shell shook. Mr. Phelps' slovenly phrases are reprehensible. Your retention of them as merchandise is worse." "Everyone keeps receipts," Rainsford said, and if he heard the way that sounded, he didn't show it. "And the key," Wolfe went on, softer. "You instructed a locksmith to duplicate my rear door cylinder from a photograph and a guess at the model. You ordered 2 trials. You coached a hireling to test them at my cellar. When he failed, you sent a second boy to approach the window like a cat burglar with press credentials. You did not intend theft. You intended myth. You intended to tell your guests that even the brownstone had yielded to your theme. That is theft, Mr. Rainsford, even if the drawer remains shut. Casey shifted. He had the decency to look at the carpet. Saul's phone thrummed again. He murmured from the hall, "Venue empty, truck gone." A crate marked "Place cards" left on the curb like a moral. I nodded, and Wolfe's shoulders eased a notch. The house breathed. "Very well," Wolfe said. "Now we come to the hinge." He rested the tips of his fingers on the copy of La Table Parisienne. "You intended one confession not listed on your cards." He had his attention then, sharp as a fish notices a hook. "You intended," Wolfe said, "to force your wife to confess that she funded your atelier after you defaulted upon your own accounts. That without her money you would have none of this apparatus. That your revenge upon people who, to put it kindly, found you tedious is paid for by the person whose reputation you find too quiet to market. You plan to drag her to the head of your table and have her say it, while you presided from a seat labeled N.W. to pretend you had conquered restraint itself." He got color then, not much, but real. "That is," he reached for absurd and couldn't get it past his teeth. "Clarissa is not a guest, she is my wife." "Exactly," Wolfe said. "Your banquets require intimacy you have not earned. What you cannot earn, you purchase, and what you cannot purchase, you drive to the table with threats you disguise as art." Rainsford looked at me to see if my expression would lend him a bridge. I didn't offer one. "Clarissa came to us," I said. "She asked us to stop you before you spoiled more than the soup." He sagged, not into defeat, but into calculation. "What is the price of absolution, Mr. Wolfe?" "Absolution?" Wolfe's lip curled. "I sell none. I deal in cessation and in clarity." Rainsford's look soured. "Then the price of cessation." "You have heard it," Wolfe said. "Return what you took. Dismantle what you built for tonight. Notify Mr. Lemaine that the item will not run and that any attempt to hint at my address will be sued. Deliver Miss Trent's book by noon and an apology with it. Not performative, not filmed. Send Mr. Phelps a written rescission of the non-disparagement draft. Send Miss Kent a note acknowledging you supplied the 3 copies she authenticated to her regret. Send Mr. Vance a copy of the monograph you promised and forego the undergraduate scrap you brandished. Send Dr. Crest his letter with a suggestion that he publish it if he wishes. Every step will be verified. Do this, and you may leave my house tonight with only a story about a dinner that did not occur. And if I don't?" There was bravado in it, but also a man measuring whether his ship still floated. "Then," Wolfe said, "Inspector Kramer will be very busy in the morning, and I will be very accommodating." Rainsford closed his eyes a second and opened them with the lid of a man pulling down a shade. "Fine, I'll do it." "Begin," Wolfe said, and turned his palm up. "Your phone?" He handed it over. Wolfe pushed it toward me and tilted his head a hair. I dialed Lemaine on speaker. The voice came bright and genial, the way a candle looks before a draft. Rainsford spoke a clean cancellation in 22 words and added 6 about legal exposure if anything ran. I cut the line before Jory could smooth it. "Next," Wolfe said. We went down the list. Phelps's assistant answered. Rainsford revoked the draft. Kent answered. He apologized, and she told him to send the knife by messenger and his pride by freight. Vance listened, then laughed once, which in his lexicon is a good review of fate. Crest said, in 4 different keys, and hung up with dignity intact. For Heloise, we reached a machine. Rainsford left a sentence that lacked poetry and, for once, benefited. When the phone lay finished between us like a plate, Wolfe adjusted his cuffs. "Good. Now for the matter you asked, what you have mistaken for art." Rainsford stared. "I suppose this is where you deliver the line you've been composing." "I do not compose lines," Wolfe said. I collect facts and arrange them so they cannot help but tell the truth." He settled deeper. "You fell in love with access and called it intimacy. You fell in love with leverage and called it candor. You fell in love with staging and called it justice. None are love, none are art. They are appetites wearing keys." He let the room absorb it. Rainsford's jaw worked again, not on a reply, but on a swallow. "You will leave," Wolfe said, "when Mr. Goodwin has the venue receipt, the courier slips, and the key to my rear door in duplicate, which Mr. Saul Panzer will return to the locksmith with instructions that no further copies may be made. Return tomorrow at noon with the book and the remainder, and I will consider the matter concluded." "And Clarissa?" he asked, low. "Clarissa does not attend your banquets," Wolfe said. "She chooses her company." He stood too fast and had to catch himself on the chair back. The young man rose more carefully, eyes on me because he had learned his evening's lesson. Exits in our house are supervised. I walked them to the hall. The night had begun to thin around the edges. On the stoop, he paused. "You enjoyed this," he said. "No," I told him, "but I enjoyed stopping you." He stared a heartbeat, then went down the steps and into the rental sedan. I watched the tail lights until the block fell back into its usual speed. In the office, Wolfe had not moved more than a millimeter. He raised his eyebrows. "Tomorrow at noon," he said. "Provided he doesn't think of an encore," I said. "He will," Wolfe murmured. "But the audience has left." He lifted the silver place card between thumb and forefinger and set it face down. "Bring me Mr. Kramer at 2, Archie. I prefer that our friends' consciences have a head start." The next day began the way Wolfe insists most things should, with eggs exactly as Fritz intended them, orchids in their morning hour, and me at my desk turning last night into neat notes in my own shorthand. Wolfe didn't ask me to read them aloud. He prefers his own memory to mine, but he likes knowing the record exists. By 11, Saul phoned. Rainsford had indeed delivered the book, signed receipt and all, and the courier slips were genuine. The venue was stripped bare, the staff paid, and the crate of place cards had gone off to landfill with the indignity of cheap wood. Rainsford had even left a sealed envelope for Kent with the palette knife inside, and one for Phelps, rescinding the non-disparagement draft. For a man who had tried to manufacture humiliation, he was now writing apologies faster than a columnist under deadline. At noon, the bell rang. This time he came alone, his suit rumpled from a night without sleep. He looked smaller, not in height, but in circumference, as if his staging had deflated him. He placed Heloise's book on Wolfe's desk without flourish, and remained standing until Wolfe gestured, curt and final, for him to sit. He did. "You have complied," Wolfe said. "That is expected. What remains is not transaction, Mr. Rainsford, but consequence. You are not charged with murder, so Inspector Kramer will receive only the trespass and the attempt at myth. That is enough to keep you occupied if you waver. Do not waver." Rainsford's hands flexed once on his knees. "So that's it. My career, finished." "No," Wolfe said. "Your masquerade as impresario, it's finished. You may paint or sculpt or peddle canvases to tourists with bad eyesight. You may even attempt sincerity, though I warn you it is more difficult to sustain than deceit. But you will not traffic in humiliation as art, not with props stolen from kitchens and ledgers." He absorbed that, eyes lowered, as though the rug's geometry might explain where he had gone wrong. "And Clarissa?" he asked again, softer than last night. "She came to me," Wolfe said, "and in doing so, she chose dignity over drama. If you wish her company again, earn it, not with staging." With conduct he stood abruptly, perhaps because sitting under Wolfe's gaze was worse than standing trial. He murmured something that could have been thanks or curse and left without another look back. The door shut with a plain click, not the slam of defiance. That, more than anything, told me the banquet was over. At 2, Inspector Kramer came in, a coat smelling of smoke and rain. I gave him the screw from the window, the duplicate key, the story in brief. He grunted, lit a cigar he wasn't supposed to light, and told Wolfe he'd keep Rainsford on a leash, though he doubted the man had the grit for real crime. Wolfe inclined his head, satisfied. Kramer glanced at me, muttered that he hated being used as punctuation, and left, trailing smoke. By evening, the brownstone had resumed its natural pulse. Fritz served squab with black cherries, a dish delicate enough to erase any trace of trespass from the kitchen. Wolfe ate slowly, methodically, and when the plates were cleared, he leaned back and let his lids drop to half-mast. "Archie," he said finally, "the appetite for humiliation is not new. The Romans fed it with blood, the French with guillotines, the moderns with columns and cameras. Mr. Rainsford's error was not invention but presumption, that he could cultivate that appetite without being consumed by it. Which is why," I said, "you pulled the table out from under him." "Precisely. To remind him that appetite without access starves, and access without decency rots. He may learn. Most men don't." He closed his eyes fully then, the universal sign that words were finished. I wrote the last line in my notes before turning out the light. In Wolfe's house, dinner is dinner, truth is truth, and anyone who confuses the two goes hungry.